You're listening to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast with Mike Chappell and Dave Griffiths.
Inside the Fox 59 CBS 4 podcast studio, welcome to another Colts Blue Zone podcast. Appreciate you joining us alongside Mike Chappell, Joe Hopkins. I'm Dave Griffiths. And a major podcast this is, just as the Colts this week have introduced their newest head coach, Shane Steichen, former offensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles. They made it official on Tuesday, introducing Steichen at a press conference. We were there. You might have, if you are subscribed to the Colts Blue Zone podcast, seen a one drop for you with the entire 30-minute-ish press conference, a little special episode. 33 minutes. I would have thought that Jim Irsay would have talked by himself for 33 minutes.
He talked about 6 minutes to open up.
Yes, he did. So you take that off, and then it's 27 minutes. So a short and sweet Shane Steichen, which is very, very welcome in my mind as I'm going through quotes, trying to put a story together. We'll hear plenty more from him over the coming weeks and months, obviously, as things really get into the offseason. But, Chap, just your first impression of Shane Steichen after your first interview with him there in the press conference.
He was tired.
As he should be.
Because, again, game Sunday, they fly him here Monday night, and they do the contract, and then they have the presser on Tuesday. He looked worn, he did, which you expect that. But I thought he was very detailed and, like you said, concise. Maybe that was partially from being worn down. But what struck me is how choked up he got when he thanked, I don't know, was it 50 people? I don't know what it was. But it really got to him because, I mean, he this is the pinnacle of his athletic career as a head coach. And he really got choked up. And I think initially when he thanked his high school coach, was it Chris Jones, I think it was?
Yes.
And then he really went off the rails when he started talking about his family. And here's his little daughter, Stella, doing hi daddy waves in front of him. So, but I thought we rarely see the human side of these guys just because there's not an occasion. We did yesterday, so now you just hope that he's the right guy, and you won't know until, I don't know, 2 years.
Right. I think a lot of Colts fans wanted an offensive-minded guy. They wanted a guy that had developed quarterbacks in the past. Exactly. So Joe, you think right now it's a hire that will please a lot of Colts fans out there. But like Chap says, you never know until 2 or 3 years down the road because sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But for right now, he is everything I think that you could want. A young coach, a strong offensive mind that has history developing young quarterbacks.
And success. I mean, he knows what it takes to make it to a Super Bowl. He was just there. No, I was excited when this came out. I think the reports started coming out Super Bowl Sunday, and then it was official Tuesday. But when the list was still up at like 13 or whatever it was, he was one of the top guys just because of the reasons you said, offensive mind, used to working with young quarterbacks and kind of getting success out of them. So this is, just because he's done it before as a coordinator or assistant coach doesn't mean he'll be a great head coach, but it's a great start.
Coaching search lasted 6 weeks for the Colts. So just pretty much exactly what Chris Ballard said. It might last into mid-February. That's exactly what it did. There were 13 candidates. He interviewed 21 total times. Ultimately, a reported 6-year contract with Steichen here in Indianapolis. And at 37 years old, is the second youngest coach in franchise history. Who's the youngest, Joe?
Don Shula.
There you go.
He was 33 back in 1963.
I think Jim Irsay mentioned Don Shula in the last press conference, introducing Jeff Saturday a ways ago.
Was it the lack of experience or something? I can't think what that was.
I forget. Something about the top quartile of the upper
sausages
quartile.
Or something.
It's rocket science. I forget exactly what it was, but it was in the context there somewhere. He was hired as Philadelphia's offensive coordinator in 2021, so the past 2 years he's been there, called plays there. Initially Nick Sirianni was calling plays, and then that didn't work, and Steichen took over. And things worked much better after Steichen took over in Philadelphia, calling plays as they made a late run to the postseason, and then all of this year. He plans to call plays again here, and if he's anything like Nick, he better be ready to give it up if it's not going well. But for now, it's his right to do so. He calls plays. I think, Chap, you look at that, because that'll probably be a talking point, I guess, about a head coach and calling plays, because Frank Reich did so here. And And I thought he was a good to decent to above average play caller in the NFL, but you could see sometimes that, at least in my mind, it appeared it got in the way of head coaching duties if he got kind of in the ref's face about something, and then all of a sudden, oh, shoot, we need to call timeout here because there's 10 seconds left on the play clock. Yeah, those are like very small things that you have to worry about as a head coach and a play caller, but Steichen's about to learn, I think, just how much goes into what that role has to be when you have to juggle everything at the same time.
Yeah, I asked him that yesterday. Up until this point in his career, he's kind of had his own little neighborhood, whether it was quarterbacks or a bigger neighborhood with the offense. Now you got the entire team. All the minutia that someone else is taking care of, practice times and all that stuff, now that's on you. So come game day, it really is on you. And I understand him wanting initially to call plays because it's his offense and he knows what he wants. And at some level, maybe he doesn't trust anyone else to do it. And I think maybe one of the great things he's got going for him is he saw Nick Sirianni do the same thing. Nick came in as a former coordinator who all of a sudden was the head coach, and he wanted to call plays, and maybe got to the point, like you mentioned, there's too much else going on. And at some point, he trusted Steichen, and we'll see where that goes here. But at least initially, that guy wants to be the guy who does it. It's his offense. One thing that's going to help, now it doesn't really change game day, and we'll get into it a little bit later on, but more than likely he's keeping Gus Bradley and Bubba. So those two areas are taken care of. So at least initially, the new head coach can really focus on the offense, and which is going to take, it's got a lot of work that needs to be done, but we'll see how long he goes with calling plays, because I think at some point there's so much going on game day that, like you said, the play clock's going down, and if you don't make the first down and you're punting it, there's a lot going on. We'll see if he's comfortable ceding that responsibility later on to his coordinator.
And that Eagles offense that he led was dynamic. I mean, it was 12th in the league last year in scoring. It bumped up to 3rd this year in scoring. Obviously, that had a lot to do with the development of Jalen Hurts, and he had something to do with the development of Jalen Hurts. So that's that. 28 points per game is basically it's closer to double what the Colts scored.
In the playoffs this year, they were, was it 34 points a game? They scored at least 31.
Yep.
And the 35 they scored in the Super Bowl was the most ever by a losing team. So them losing wasn't an offensive issue.
Not his fault.
Except for that one, fumble by Jalen Hurts that was the worst possible
mind-boggling
outcome.
Absolutely mind-boggling right there. And I'd rather not talk about it anymore, as you would imagine. He was the offensive coordinator for the L.A. Chargers from 2019 to 2020. And then an assistant, a position coach in the NFL, mostly with the Chargers between 2011 and 2019. Before that, he worked with Nick Sirianni then, worked with Frank Reich when they were with the Chargers, has worked with quarterbacks like Phillip Rivers, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts. And Phillip Rivers is a name that came up in the press conference yesterday. Jim Irsay said that he had talked plenty with Phillip Rivers about what Steichen, about who Steichen was and the coach that he was. So in addition of dealing with young quarterbacks, I think it's good, Joe, that he has a little bit of experience with a very experienced quarterback, and he got to learn a little bit from a guy who had been in the league for a long time, had a lot of success for a long time. So he had that to kind of shape him as a young coach a little bit, going alongside a quarterback who was really close to his age, actually, if you're looking at it that way. But at that time, he was a quarterback that had more success or more years in the NFL than Steichen did as a head coach. So I like that part of his history as well, that he was with a guy who could be a Hall of Fame quarterback in the next couple of years. Yeah,
I'm sure it really helped to work with the veteran who's been there and done that for a long time before going on to help mold these young quarterbacks like Herbert and Hurts. And I also like three very different quarterbacks in terms of physical abilities, what they do well. Herbert basically is the guy that you would create in Madden, create a player, 6'6", just a cannon for an arm and can move as well. And then you got Phillip Rivers, who we all watch. I don't think Matt Ryan, if they were in a race when Matt Ryan ran that 30 yards, Matt Ryan would have dusted him. That's right. How mobile Rivers was. And then we all saw Hurts throughout the postseason and in the Super Bowl just running all over the place. Barreling through defenders with those legs that can squat 600 pounds. So that's really encouraging that whatever quarterback they end up in this upcoming draft, and they might not get their first pick. He should be able to have the skills to make it work with whatever their abilities are.
Need new windows? Let the Hometown team help. Hometown Windows and Doors is Central Indiana's premier locally owned full-service Andersen dealer with master installers. From design to installation, we handle it all, carrying nationally known brands like Andersen with more options and competitive pricing. Call us direct and get 25% off your windows if you buy within the next 60 days.
Please contact your Hometown team today. We are Central Indiana's premier, locally owned, full-service Andersen dealer.
National brand, hometown feel.
The story of Hancock Health is all about you and everything you need to live your healthiest life. Like Hancock Regional, one of the nation's safest hospitals, and an independent health network with over 70 doctors at more than 30 locations around East Central Indiana. We're growing and evolving to help further your story. And we're just getting started. See all the ways Hancock Health and you can work together to make health possible at hancockhealth.org.
Well, let's take a look at kind of why the Colts decided to hire Shane Steichen from the press conference that we had the other day. Again, you can listen to this via the Colts Blue Zone podcast, which is what you're listening to right now, our very last episode. And if you subscribe, you can get this downloaded to your podcast listening device as soon as they drop, whenever that is. Irsay said that Steichen's interview was particularly impressive, showed leadership, toughness, and a quick mind there as well throughout the process, and he was able to disseminate information quickly. And that in the conversation he had with Chris Ballard after the fact just kind of came to the ultimate conclusion that Steichen was their guy above the other candidates. And definitely pointed out the, quote, offensive magic, end quote, is key, knowing they'll have to develop a young quarterback, is what Irsay was kind of alluding to, saying that, and I think Ballard even hinted at that as well, Chap, that even though some of the other defensive guys were impressive, that just the fact that he had some... He has found success in offense in this league when offense is so important was a contributing factor to why they decided to give him the job.
Yeah, I asked him that, and he said, was that a factor? Yes, but not a defining factor. But it needed to really be a huge factor, because we've talked before. Everything you do at this level of your franchise is a risk. It just is. It's a risk to bring in Shane Steichen because he's never done this before. So you've got that. And then if you bring in a defensive coordinator, that's a risk. And then who's his offensive coordinator? That's a risk. And then the quarterback's a risk. So I like the idea of limiting my risks. And with a guy who's done it, again, proven, has done it at a couple places, like what Joe said, with different style quarterbacks. If it doesn't work, it's not because you didn't set things up to work. You have set things up to work. And I think, again, like what Joe mentioned, what's encouraging is we'll see how the draft pans out. I sort of think the Colts might get the second pick. We were talking off air about maybe Houston goes up to get one, to get their guy, and then you get number two. But whoever it is, the new head coach can work with what he's got. He talked yesterday that it's about players. It'll always be about players, which is, I go back to Tom Moore. That's what he always said. It's players. Don't think your system is so good that you can make it work with whomever. Make your system work with the players. Build your scheme around the players. So I'm encouraged. But again, this is the first domino to fall. The next one will be his coordinator, whoever that's going to be, probably from Philly, more than likely, and then the quarterback.
I do want to bring it up here since you touched on the draft, and maybe the Colts pick second. Jim Irsay is doing his best to tease Colts fans mightily right now about
he set the hook.
Draft. He is first of all, in the press conference where he just says that Alabama guy doesn't look bad, I'll tell you. So there it is. And then today, as we tape this on Wednesday, he goes and tweets out a picture of himself in the Chicago Zoo with a bear saying, "I've always worked well with Chicago." Like, there is part of this that I'm like, look, Jim, you'd better be not just teasing the fan base. You better have something really concrete in this, because I don't know. To me, maybe it rubbed me the wrong way that he is teasing the fan base this way because people really
does
care
that
about
all the
this.
time.
I know, but
You'd think he would learn that it's not a good thing to poke the bear. But that's what he is. And again, this will largely be out of the Colts' hands. Because again, I really think if both Houston and the Colts decide on this is our guy, whoever it is, then you move heaven and earth to go to one. If the Colts stay at 4, shame on them. Because I think we talked last week about go up and get your guy, and if it doesn't work, you go down swinging with your guy. I think you talked about that last week. But again, if Houston wants to go to 1, they're going to go to 1. They've got more draft capital to go at than you do, meaning the Colts. But the Colts need to make a concerted effort to go to 1. And in all honesty, if it takes, what have we seen? A flip first rounds, second round, and a 2024 first rounder? Somebody said a second rounder, not a chance.
no.
It's going to take more. But so what? If I'm Chris Ballard, who loves them picks, it doesn't matter.
I don't care how much you love your picks.
It doesn't matter, because if I'm Chris Ballard and I don't do it, you're not going to be here in 2025 or whatever to worry about that pick you gave up. So I don't want to say within reason. I've always said there's got to be a grunt level, but maybe not. You do what it takes to move up to 1. But I think Houston can stop you from doing that if they feel that strongly about going to 1.
Yep, I think the Bears are in a great position. It brings us back to that, Joe, that they're going to have a bevy of options because there's a lot of teams
might want to go up.
that want to go up and get their picks. Houston has 2 picks in the first round this year. Just a couple years ago, the 49ers traded 3 picks to go up and get Trey Lance at, what was that, number 3 overall, I thought it was? So if you're going up to number 1 overall, it's going to be a haul. And like I said last week, if there is one guy that you think is above the rest, everyone here, you go get him, and there's no excuse to not doing it.
What if you think that guy's Anthony Richardson? Do you stay at 4? Do you stay at 4?
I think that's part of, exterior scouting the other teams and trying to get what you can from other teams. If the Colts get word that, say, Houston loves Will Levis and then it's not their guy, and they feel very confident about that, then they can stay back and maybe get who they want at 4. Maybe it's Richardson, and they're very confident that because as of right now, 4 would be pretty high for Richardson, who's thought to be a first-round pick, maybe not at the level of Young or Stroud or whatnot, but everyone kind of agrees he has the highest ceiling in this draft because of his physical tools, and if the Colts fall in love with those tools, Ballard's always been he has his prototype. He has his prototypes, and
before long, we're going to have somebody put a picture of Richardson standing next to Bryce Young, just to exemplify the difference in him.
Mm-hmm.
But the only way you stay at 4 is if you really like all 4 of these guys, and none of them just blow your socks off. Then you stay at 4, and you take whatever's there. But boy, if you like 1 or 2 guys better than the others, you can't stay at 4.
Shane Steichen, by the way, said the most important thing for a quarterback to have success in the NFL is accuracy, decision-making, and the ability to create. And then also they're obsessed with their craft is something that he mentioned with all the quarterbacks that he's worked with, guys like Rivers and Hurts, who have just been junkies when it comes to the film, when it comes to getting better.
If your quarterback's not a junkie,
then forget about it.
He's the wrong guy.
Forget about it, Kyler Murray. Forget about it. I mean, there's one way to be successful in the NFL at quarterback.
You're the first in the building, and you're the last in the building.
Yeah, because as much as Chris Ballard wants to say it's 1 out of 53, like, you're the one who's touching the ball on every snap on offense. You're the one who's making the decisions out there when the bullets are flying.
One of those years, I can't remember what year it was, they drafted Anthony Gonzalez in the first round from Ohio State, and he couldn't be here for the offseason work because of graduation. Peyton would drive to Columbus, like on a Wednesday or Thursday, Friday, and they'd work out. That's what your quarterback does. So that's the kind of guy you've got to have.
Shane Steichen's plan that he outlined for success, he will build the team on 4 pillars. 1 is character, treating people with respect, feed the positive, weed out the negative. Number 2, preparation, how organization prepares Monday through Saturday will ultimately dictate how the game plays out on Sunday. Number 3, consistency. Coaches send consistent messages to players telling them exactly how they want it to look and to be done. And 4 is relentlessness. The best players, coaches, are obsessed with their craft. Out of those 4, Chap, any of them stand out to you as things that you think the Colts could use some dramatic improvement at, or are they all just kind of generic things that any coach might say in general when in a situation like this?
I thought when I was hearing this, I thought, well, we're going to get tired of hearing this like we did with Frank.
Yeah.
The 1% better and the preparation. And that's what it comes down to. And what we're going to hear, and it's inevitable, is when you hear when a guy says this, or when players talk about accountability, because that was another thing, the accountability, it makes you think that that's what they lacked last year. And there was talk that they did lack accountability, that Frank didn't really hold players' feet to the fire, and that's what they need. It's hard to know that, because few people will go on the record and say they didn't do this. But I think we're going to get as tired of hearing Steichen's 4 pillars as we did with Frank, the 1% better and all that. But that's fine. Maybe the players just tune Frank out after five years. I don't know, maybe. But there will be no excuse for these guys not being prepared, because this, whatever we took away from Shane Steichen, they're going to hammer the details in preparation, and there will be no excuses to not be ready on a Sunday.
Joe, his offensive philosophy is throw to score, run to win. What did you take away from that?
I liked it. It kind of goes to the, you got to be able to, it's obvious, no more obvious than with the Colts this year. You got to be able to pass the ball to score points. And if you don't have a good passing game, it's just not going to work. You can't run the ball 35 times every single game. But to that point, you reach a level in the game where if you have a lead, you need to be able to run the ball to, finish out that win, run the clock out, be able to get first downs on the ground. And so, it's easier said than done, because being a terrific passing team and a terrific running team at the same time, not a lot of teams are able to accomplish that. We saw that with the Eagles this year. They were one of the few who were. We saw that with the Chiefs in a different way, but they were able to run the ball more than the Eagles were on Super Bowl Sunday. So, or at least with the running backs. Obviously, Hurts did his damage, but I like the philosophy. I also liked how he talked about building around your player's strengths. He mentioned Pittman specifically. What routes does he run well? That's what we're going to ask him to do.
What can you take away from Pittman last year? They couldn't build around his strengths.
That's a tough thing, yeah.
Because they couldn't throw the ball.
Yeah, exactly. And he talked about with the young quarterbacks, look at what they did well in college, incorporate that into your offense, and then build from there. So I liked everything he had to say. I'm very excited about pairing this young offensive mind with a young arm that we get in the draft this year. And so it's going to be an exciting time to be a Colts fan in 2023.
So much of it depends on who he brings along, of course, on the staff. And I think Steichen has a good head on his shoulders to realize that, because of kind of his introduction. Now, how, Chap, you mentioned he thanked 50 people. So he realizes that he's here on the shoulders of everyone who has lifted him up.
They're why I am here today.
Right. And to have that mentality first, I think, is crucial for a coach in order to build a staff around him that does the same thing on a daily basis, whether you're in the offseason or in the season. So when it comes to the staff, defensive coordinator Gus Bradley and special teams coach Bubba Ventrone were both there in attendance.
That's telling.
I think it is too. Very telling. Even though Steichen would not comment on staff building, and I think that's fine. Like, that's something that he's really going to dive into later and get into the nitty-gritty about, talk with these guys and really dive into their philosophies and let them know his philosophies. I think it would be premature to say, oh, yeah, for sure, we're bringing this guy back before you meet with him and sit down with him for, a couple hours.
But keep in mind, the Colts did not allow Gus to talk elsewhere.
Exactly.
Because if you remember, and one of the parts of this interview process is, okay, who do you see as your staff? Who do you think you can bring in? So Steichen's already told the Colts, Ballard and Irsay, these are the guys I want my staff to be.
Right.
And you just have to believe it's Gus and most of his assistants, Bubba, who one of these days will get a head coaching possibility. Now, the offensive staff's going to be totally different, totally. I saw today with Parks Frazier.
Gone to Carolina.
Going to Carolina, which of course he is.
Yeah.
But the only one that might be back is Reggie. And I've reached out to Reggie twice, and he's just, I won't say ghosting, because
he's on a beach somewhere.
He's on a beach having his 10th adult beverage. But to me, this would be Reggie's call. If he wants to come back, you say, of course. The receivers really like him. He had a good influence. Everybody else is going to be brand new. And the next tile that has to fall is who's your coordinator. Kevin Patullo, maybe from Philly. He was here earlier, but he'll bring a couple of Phillies people with him.
No doubt, for sure. Maybe a couple guys from San Diego, L.A., wherever the heck they are out there. It always still goes to San Diego with me.
I just say Chargers because I'd mess it up.
Yeah, but maybe in like 5 years I'll finally shed that habit, Joe.
Well, and do you guys think that bringing back Bradley and Ventrone, we kind of talked at the beginning of the show about juggling being a head coach and play caller at the same time. Do you think that maybe bringing those coaches back who have already kind of established things with players will take a little bit off Steichen's plate in that regard, that Gus and Bubba have already been here, they've already coached these guys, they know what they're doing to a certain extent?
Yeah, I think so, and it'll certainly help for him to get to know the roster better, to have those two guys there. And on the offense, then he can make his own judgments about the roster. But if he wants to go with a guy like Bradley, who's been a head coach in the NFL before and been an incredibly successful defensive coordinator for many, many years.
Several years with Steichen and with the Chargers.
Bradley was?
Yep.
Okay.
2 or 3 years, 4 years, was it?
Oh, there you go.
So that you always bring in people that you're comfortable with, that you know. And I think like Joe mentioned and we've talked about, if you can keep status quo on defense and special teams, of course Steichen's going to have input on those areas because he's the head coach. But this allows him to not initially be so spread out with everything. He can concentrate on, like we've said, if they don't get this offense fixed, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So they've got to really get their staff in place and then really focus on that quarterback in April. So it will be beneficial to have 2/3 of your staff, for the most part, back. They know the roster, they know the players, they know what's needed. And the head coach can really focus on the offense.
And I really think there's nobody in that building who knows the back end of the roster better than Bubba Ventrone.
He talked about that.
Because he has to. Like he has
Those
to
are
know
his guys.
Yeah, their strengths and their weaknesses. So he has to know the guys who are most important, the guys who they might be able to replace through the draft or free agency, whatever this year. He could be a valuable resource to Steichen as he's trying to get settled in this new place. And it comes down to whether does Bubba want to come back? He was passed over for the interim head coaching role. There might still be hard feelings, you would think, but he was there yesterday at the presser, so you think that's probably gone.
I can't get past the fact that they were there.
Right, exactly.
They were there. And again, they've had. I went over and talked to Gus a few minutes after the Steichen press conference, and just to catch up. And I said, "So, what do you know?" He said, "Well, we'll talk in the next few days. We'll talk in the next few days." And until yesterday, these coaches, I get the impression, really haven't done much because they didn't know if they're going to be here. Do you want, the few offensive guys left with the defensive staff evaluating your roster when you don't know if they're going to be here? So now they're going to get busy. They know what Gus knows. He knew that the moment that Steichen was signed that he either was or wasn't going to be back. And if he's not going to be back, he wasn't just there yesterday out of interest. I mean, let's see what's going on here. That's why I think, and again, and there were a lot of defensive coaches that are harder to recognize, but when you see Gus and his bald head and Bubba, you notice them, and there were, 4 or 5 players. Quentin Nelson was there, Michael Pittman, Tyquan Lewis. So there's an interest there, and those assistant coaches wouldn't be there if they're not going to be there.
I want to get into one or two things that Steichen said in this press conference. We can break them down before we really move on to some of the news that we have this week. And he was asked about kind of his way of coaching, Shane Steichen was. And he says, obviously we're going to have a detailed plan on how we want to get things done. I go with my gut feeling on a lot of things. I'm a gut feeling guy, especially on game day. I'll have a gut feeling on when to do certain things as a play caller. All those different things. Again, we're going to be aggressive and all those different things. My philosophy offensively, I'm sure you guys are going to ask, but my philosophy, blah, 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 going into is we're going to be different every week, and we're going to throw to score points and run to win. But the fact about being a kind of a gut feeling guy, Chap, I think is one of the main reasons that he wants to call plays first. If he's always relied on gut feelings in the past and not necessarily on, we have to run this play on first down, this on second, this on third, in this situation, and being so meticulous and detail connected and there's a difference between that type of coach and a guy like Steichen who can kind of have everything jumbled up there and pick things out when necessary. That's kind of what a gut feeling coach is to me. So it's understandable if that's how he's done things in the past to want to do it right now because that's what he's comfortable with. And to kind of establish something there as a play caller before he would even consider giving it up, if it ever comes to it.
He wants to set the tone, and this is how we're going to be generally. The situations will change things, but he's going to be an aggressive guy. I was looking. Remember the Eagles were 11 of 18 on third down against the Chiefs. They were 5 for 5 on fourth down in the playoffs in 3 games. So they go for it. Now,
yeah, I hope he brings that quarterback sneak over.
I was just saying, it's all talent related. It just is. And if you've got the talent, the quarterback, or for crying out loud, A.J. Brown or Smith or the tight end, you can be so aggressive because your players are better than their players. Well, right now that's not where the Colts are.
No.
He's the biggest transition he's going to face is not having those guys. So you've got to be able to accept the fact of who you are right now and who you aren't right now. But I just like the fact that I think he's going to be aggressive. He's going to tailor his offense to the players. And there's probably 3 or 4 significant players not here on offense that aren't here yet because you're going to see change with the head coach.
Yeah, not Joe. Not every team in the league has Landon Dickerson, Jason Kelsey, and Isaac Semualo there, right in front of a guy who can squat 600 pounds, and then 2 receivers like A.J. Brown is one of the more physical receivers in the league who can push him also right behind him. So,
well, maybe they might be able to get the guard Isaac in free agency because his contract is out.
Indeed,
bring him
it
over,
is.
Plug him in at right guard.
The best
just spend more money on the offensive line. That's Joe's plan this offseason.
The best defense for that 4th and 1 is not letting him get in 4th and 1. Make it 4th and 3.
Yeah,
they're not going to sneak his ass on 4th and 3.
No,
but again, and you look at this team, he's got so much to do on his plate. And who's his offensive line coach? And
Jeff Saturday, duh.
How awkward would that? That's kind of like the quartile thing. We're gonna have a little ding when we mention that, but how awkward would that be to have Jeff in the building as an offensive line coach? Ooh. But it's they've got to evaluate on the offensive line. Was last year just an aberration to where your 3 cornerstone players just didn't play well until I think Q played pretty well the last 2/3, and I think Braden Smith did. Ryan Kelly hit and miss. But until they get that fixed, it's going to be tough. But that's on his plate to figure out what you've got, what do you need. That's why I say it's really important that he can concentrate on that and not while worrying about the offensive line or the quarterback or what are we doing on defensive line or special teams because you've got those guys in place.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Well.
It feels like you want to say something.
I think there's more work to do on the offensive line than just ride it out. But that's not
another guy. There was Bernard Reinman.
Yeah, that's not.
He might be one of the biggest key players heading into the next year.
Yep.
Is he the guy? We've already seen a guy who wasn't the guy going into an off season, and we'll have a podcast where we can focus just on that area. But if you have trouble at left tackle, you have trouble.
Well, and I don't think it's a coincidence that, we talk about Braden Smith and Quentin Nelson they played better as the season went along. Well, so did Ryman. So did the left tackle position. And so obviously it all goes together.
And maybe Q had problems early because he's trying to cover for an inefficient left tackle, which there's probably something to that.
So
Possibly.
a lot of evaluation to do.
Yep. A lot of job on Coach Steichen's plate, and but the first thing is getting that staff together, and then you evaluate. You get into the free agency and the draft, and so like I said, we'll hear plenty more from him over the coming weeks. Looking forward to seeing what happens. It's a time of change. That means it's a time of you can be incredibly optimistic or incredibly pessimistic right now, and I think there's every reason to be optimistic right now.
This isn't an occasion where you go all in and you just make crazy moves, but you still have to be bold because you can't bring in a rookie quarterback, even though he more than likely won't start. You can't bring in a rookie quarterback and then not have addressed wide receiver and not have addressed your offensive line and tight end probably as well. So it's going to be really incumbent upon these guys to find ways through free agency, not so much through the draft past the quarterback, because you're going to give up your first-round pick for your quarterback and probably your second-round pick for that quarterback. But free agency, you're going to have to add a receiver. You're going to have to add maybe a blocking tight end and a right guard maybe from Philly. I don't know. So, but it's going to be really interesting. This, like I said, and I'll harp on this, this was the first step, but there's 2 or 3 other massive steps they've got to take. And that's why I say you're not going all in, but you're being bold. Don't waste the first few years of a young quarterback by turning him into David Carr and just getting him beat up.
And I think that's why I'm hemming and hawing here a little bit, because we got an introduction to Shane Steichen, but now and that was by far the most important decision, that and then the quarterback kind of 1A and 1B, what happens to this franchise this offseason. And after that, there's so much. There's so much, whether it is help on the offensive line, wide receiver, getting Pittman and Taylor re-signed. What's going to happen on defense? Is Bradley coming back? If he doesn't, then you're going to have a lot of changeover probably in personnel there, because it's going to be someone else with a different system. So this is just the first domino to fall. And understandably, we didn't ask Steichen about all these other dominoes, because it was really just more about kind of getting the baseline.
Those would have been questions for Chris more.
Exactly. Yes,
more,
that too.
I think. But, we're like 20 free agents to worry about. You know, Yannick Ngakoue.
Yep.
What do you do with Matt Ryan and Nick Foles? Well, you probably cut them.
You're not going to trade him. Who's going to take him?
Boy, wouldn't you love to trade Matt Ryan?
That'd be fantastic.
Please.
Get him completely off the books.
I've had somebody out on the interstate with those signs, quarterback.
We'll trade for food.
Right.
They could call Washington.
And
you never know.
We'll give you a draft pick to take him. So you've got that, and then after you get rid of those 2 quarterbacks, like we've talked, you're going to have to bring in a veteran quarterback. I can think of no better veteran quarterback to tutor a rookie than Matt Ryan, but you can't for $35 million. Can't do it.
Right.
So they got to have somebody, Gardner Minshew, somebody like that. But we've rattled off 6, 8, 10 things that they've got to do. But fortunately, we got the one thing out of the way after 5 or 6 weeks, and now they roll up their sleeves and get to work, because they got a lot of work to do.
Well, and just looking at the timeline for Steichen, he goes straight from coaching all the way through the Super Bowl. You mentioned how weary and tired he seemed on Tuesday. You got the combine in 2 weeks. You got free agency in about 3.5, depending on when the legal or not so legal tampering period begins. And then after free agency, it's like a month until you got the draft. So he's not really going to have much of a chance to catch his breath here. He's going to have to pound some 5-hour energies or whatever his taste is and get after it, because it is just one thing after another here.
As long as he's not like Will Levis and puts mayo in his coffee, then we'll be okay.
I had to bring him down my draft board a little bit.
I know, right? Yeah, I kind of liked Will Levis until I learned that about him, mayo in your coffee.
But we talked about all that's, now he's the head coach. I remember when Tony Dungy was here and we were talking, and the first time he was the head coach with Tampa, he said he's sitting in his new office and he's on the phone with somebody he wants to be his offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, and somebody knocks on the door and he says, "Well, come on in." And he said, "What can I do for you?" He said, "Well, I need to know what color you want your office." And here he's trying to get his staff together. So there's those little things that you don't think about that you have to think about. So I was kind of wondering in my head, he's here yesterday with his wife and 2 kids. They came straight from Phoenix. They didn't go home. So does he go home for a day or 2 days and pack, 3 or 4 suitcases, 2 suitcases? If you're a guy, you don't pack a lot.
1.5.
and you come back here and you're here and the wife and the kids are probably home for a while.
Probably.
So at least
Got school over there.
Well, but they're young kids. The son's 6.
I was gonna say he's probably in first grade.
And Stella's 3. So whether it's you move you move them here right away and you're not, at least the kids aren't in high school type of thing.
Right.
But there's so much going on now for the new head coach. All the things that Joe mentioned with the combine and all free agency and the draft, but there's all the other things, the personal stuff that really takes probably more of your time.
Yep, and it comes back to one of the things that I think it was Irsay said that he could process and disseminate information quickly. You're going to have to do that right now. Not even on the football field yet. You have to do that right now with everything else.
Yep.
Like everything's coming at you, organize it, and get it done. And then you will be set up for success when it comes to combine, free agency.
Because just when you think you've got everything covered for the day, something's left that didn't get taken care of, that needs to get taken care of. There's always something else.
Which is why we always find something to talk about on the Colts Blue Zone podcast, 52 weeks a year. What does Hancock Health's membership in the Mayo Clinic Care Network mean for you? It means our independent health network now has access to the knowledge and resources of the world leader in medicine. It means your Hancock Health doctor can now consult with Mayo Clinic specialists to confirm a diagnosis or treatment plan, and it means that together we're making health possible for you. Learn more about our new clinical collaboration at hancockregional.org/Mayo Clinic. Need new windows? Contact your hometown team today. Hometown Window and Doors are Central Indiana's premier locally owned full-service Anderson window dealer with master installers. From design to installation, the Hometown team handles it all. They carry unlimited options with competitive pricing. Call them direct to get 25% off your windows if you call within the next 60 days. Hometown Windows and Doors gives you all the perks of a national brand with a hometown feel. Visit them at hometownwindowteam.com today. Some news outside of just the coaching search for the Colts this week. It was Reggie Wade and Dwight Freeney's time to almost get selected to the Hall of Fame again. But, Chap, they did not make the final cut. Could you share a little bit of the behind the scenes from what you can from the discussions? Because I know last year you were ready to rip somebody's head off. I hope that you weren't quite at the same level of frustration this year when it came to Reggie and Dwight in the Hall of Fame.
Same level, just not quite as intense.
Okay.
Again, the way it works, there were 15 modern era players to make, that we discussed. This was about a month ago. We had our meeting, and from there you vote, you pare it down to 10. In Reggie's first 3 years, he never made the cut to 10. So this year he did. Dwight Freeney did not. I thought maybe Dwight would, but he didn't. And this year, all 3 receivers made the cut to 10. Andre Johnson, Reggie, and Torrey Holt. So I thought, there's a chance one of these guys is going to get in.
Yeah.
As it turned out, they didn't, and I was PO'd. The problem we have with the receivers is they're not the same guy, but their resumes are very similar. There's, you can argue, I can argue strongly for each one of them.
Right. So, they're in the final 10. There's a good chance they're going to make it in one day.
And it's not like, Calvin Johnson 2 years ago. Well, Calvin Johnson was different. He's just they're guys you see and you think, yeah, he's first ballot. Put him in. Well, these guys are not that. They're very close in yards per game, yards for their career. I mean, Reggie's 10th in yards and catches, and I think Andre Johnson's 11th. So they're right there. So we've got to figure out as selectors how we differentiate to break the log jam. Or if we don't, we're going to have this every year, which it just drives you crazy. It was brought up that maybe we should unofficially or whatever say we're going to go by who's been waiting the longest and put him in, and the next guy gets in. So in that case, it would be Torrey Holt, Reggie, and then Andre Johnson.
Right.
But there's not a chance we're going to get 49 people to agree.
Right.
to give up one of their votes every year. It's not going to happen. So somehow we have to do this. I've run out of material. I mean, you do it for 4 years with Reggie, and there's just nothing. What do you guys? It's like you want to say, okay, what do you want? Mm-hmm. What can I tell you guys? And all three guys are like that. So we'll see. I didn't agree with the five guys. I've never been a Zach Thomas on the Zach Thomas train. I think he's a very good player, very, very good player. Not quite Hall of Fame, but that's why we have 49 people and 49 opinions. So we'll do it again next year. And Dwight will have a little better of a chance, maybe. You get DeMarcus Ware out of the way.
Yeah.
But then you got Julius Peppers coming up.
Right. I didn't think next year's first ballot first round guys were particularly impressive. It was Julius Peppers who is for sure.
Once you get Julius Peppers, they're a bunch of guys.
And there's a bunch of guys, yeah.
And people always say, well, this guy's not Hall of Fame. Well, but that list is people that are eligible.
Right.
Like I think Julian Edelman.
Andrew Luck,
yeah. I left that alone.
Are you going to present Andrew Luck to the...
That's one that's really hard. Because, again, what people need to realize, we get the initial list of candidates. It's like 120 people.
Right.
And you just nominate guys. I always make sure that the Colts are in there, Jeff Saturday and Bob Sanders and Dallas Clark and all those guys, just to get their names on there. Mm-hmm. And they just don't get the traction, obviously. Robert Mathis and Dwight, Freeney, and Reggie. But there's, like you said, if you look at that list, Julius Peppers is the only one to me that jumps out, and I think he's pretty good.
Yeah. There was another one that was decent. I forget who, and then Eric Berry was like the third, the safety for the Chiefs,
right?
Kind of in my in the pecking
But
order.
the fact that you have to think about it,
yeah,
we've always
and
argued.
I can't remember who it was.
We're so quick to put first ballot guys in. This year it was Joe Thomas and Darrelle Revis.
Antonio Gates, maybe?
That's right. It was Antonio Gates, yeah, who was a very, very good tight end over the years.
But he was almost a receiver.
Yes.
And that's where we're getting in trouble. We got the three receivers. We're going to have Gates, and then in a couple of years we're going to have Jason Witten. Mm-hmm. So we've got to get these receivers, the pipeline broken. Before long we're going to have Larry Fitzgerald. Well, he's first ballot.
Yeah,
he just is. Julio Jones in 5 years. So I'm convinced that Reggie gets in, and it's no consolation to him that one day. Although, again, I went through this with Edgerrin, and he was PO'd every year about what he called the dog and pony show that you go through. But then he said, once you get in, you're in.
Right.
And nobody remembers that it took you 4 years, 5 years, or whatever. I'm still stunned that it took Marvin 3 years. It's just crazy. So he'll get in, but we've got to figure a way to break the logjam at receivers so that we can get him in.
Yeah, I think Joe Thomas is a tremendous offensive tackle, so I understand why he's there. I think Darrelle Revis is a tremendous cornerback, but at the same time, I think you can easily make the argument that Reggie Wayne could deserve it just as much as either of those
we
two
could have
guys
waited on Darrelle Revis.
On those two. And Darrelle, especially if you're going to elect Rondé Barber to the Hall of Fame, too. So I have one more question for you. We don't have to get too much further into this, but I'm curious where Devin Hester wound up. Did he stay in the 15?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was one of the 15.
Because I think, once again, I think that if you're the best at something, you should be in the Hall of Fame. And that's going to be an Adam Vinatieri issue in a couple years as well. Is he a first ballot guy? Is he a kicker so he doesn't become a first ballot guy? Devin Hester has stayed in the 15 right now. He's not even getting into the 10.
I think this is 2 years in a row.
Yes,
15 and didn't make 10. Vinatieri, to me, I just think he's a guy you stand up and say his name and sit down. I hope I can still do this for a couple of years. So when he comes up, I think he's eligible in 2 years.
Yes.
He's a guy that if you just gave his statistics, Super Bowls and points and all this, and not mention the position, of course he's a Hall of Famer. What was it, four Super Bowls and he won 2 and all-time points. But the fact he's a kicker, but he's a kicker. Well, we had that with Devin Hester. Dan Pompey, I don't know who Dan's working for now. He's from Chicago. Gave a great presentation of how elite Devin Hester was. And I'm telling you, after that, you thought this was just a guy the way people tore him down. It was because, no, he's not the greatest kick returner of all time. He was the greatest of his generation. And then it was, this is the guy you game plan for. Well, yeah, but you game plan him for like 6 plays. That's what it's hard. It's hard for people to get past on special teams guys. Is he's only out there 6 or 7 plays generally during a game. Well,
Right.
but if he takes a kickback or a punt back, that's impact. But I was stunned that the groundswell against Devin Hester / special teams when we met. But because, again, when we got done, I thought, boy, this guy must have been terrible.
Yeah.
And I saw him play, and he wasn't terrible.
Right.
So, but there is that special team stigma that he's not out there nearly as much. With a Dwight Freeney, you game plan for him 50 plays a game, 40 plays. Because if you don't, he's going to wreck your game.
Right.
But it's going to be tough for him to get in just because of the special team thing. If that's the case with Vinatieri, I may just retire because he was, when you talk about his position, he was the best for, 20 years? I mean, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Most points. And remember, he had the string of 44 straight field goals.
Yep.
When he was like 42
years old.
So, but we'll see. It's interesting, and the fact you've got 49 people, you've got different opinions about things. And one thing that still rankled me was 2 years ago when I was talking about Reggie, and a guy from New York came up and said, well, he said, what you need to explain to me is how, if he's a Hall of Famer, he had 1 catch for 1 yard in the playoff loss to the Jets. 1 game.
1 game in his career.
And if I'd have been quick enough on my feet, I said, well, yeah, Brett Favre had 6 interceptions against the Rams in the playoffs, and he would have thrown 7 if he had time. Mm-hmm. So you can do anybody 1 game at a time. It's the body of work, so we'll do it again next year.
Frank Reich is bringing some former Colts to Carolina with him. Jim Caldwell has been hired as a senior offensive assistant, and Parks Frazier has been hired as the passing game coordinator there for the Carolina Panthers. So no surprise to see that some guys that Frank knows from his past are heading with him to Carolina. And we'll see what quarterback they get as well, whether it's in the draft or whatever free agency, and that Frank and Parks and Jim get to work with.
I wondered if Frank would have wanted to try to take Bubba with him. And maybe the Colts said, nah, not so fast. So, but Jim Caldwell, when I saw that, I thought, what a great hire.
Yep.
I mean,
I love Jim Caldwell.
Great offensive mind.
Great
but
coach.
Such a great person. Just got shafted here. The fans ran him out of town, basically, and I thought, are you crazy? He was within 1 play, 2 plays of winning a Super Bowl as a rookie coach.
Yep.
So, but it looks like a pretty – and one of the defensive coordinator in Carolina is the Denver DC that the Colts interviewed. Mm-hmm. You can say his name because I'll mess it up.
Ijero Ivero.
See how I messed it. I can spell it. I can't say it.
All you need to do is spell it.
All I gotta
I
do
need
is
to say
spell
it. It's all good. You know how I learned how to say it? I go onto YouTube and I go onto like the team page. I went to the Denver Broncos team page on YouTube. And I searched his name, and there was one that popped up with just like him explaining this scheme or something like that. So I click on that. It pops up. He's like, hello, I'm Denver Broncos defensive coordinator, Ijero Ivero, and I'm going to explain blah, blah, blah to you. I'm like, boom, there it is. He said it himself. So if anyone says anything, I'll be like, that's how he said his name.
I did that with Steichen because I wanted to say Steichen.
Right.
And I went on YouTube or Google,
Steichen.
And it was pronunciation of Steichen. And you click it on, and it's like 10 seconds of it's Steichen. So now instead of seeing the CH, I'm just going to put a K in there.
There you go.
And I'll be fine.
It'll sneak into one script online at fox59.com or cbs4indy.com. So if you see that, please grant Mike Chappell a little bit of grace because he's just trying to learn, once again, how to say it so he can deliver the best possible content to you right here on the Colts Blue Zone podcast. Exactly. So lot of stuff coming up in the future. Really looking forward to seeing what happens with the horseshoes on every level, whether it is the draft, the combine, or free agency. But now that they have their man at head coach, they can start making some of those decisions. The first thing that'll come out certainly is the staff over the next week or two. They'll get that set and then really hit the ground running with everything else when it comes to personnel.
And then free agency.
And then free agency. Yep. 3 weeks from now.
Who they cut? Do they cut?
Yep.
Of course they're going to cut Ryan and Foles.
Who do they want to bring back? We've started these things a little bit already.
Do they cut Kenny Moore?
Yep. They might.
You save $8 million.
Yep. He can head to Chicago.
They could put him in the package with for that number 1 pick and say,
totally.
Hey, would you take Kenny?
Totally.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure that
Eberflus
would love Kenny Moore.
It was a perfect scheme.
Yep.
For Kenny, it was.
That just makes too much sense
Sure
to send Kenny Moore up there because he was fine this year, but he was not electric like he was in the previous scheme. Like it makes too much sense. And I love Kenny. I wish that we could talk to Kenny every week. I wish that he could stay here.
But you can see his frustration as the season went on.
Completely. And I'm right in his corner there. Like I'm a biggest enough fan of Kenny Moore that I want to see enough his success, and I think he would have more success in Chicago than he would have here in Indianapolis. It makes too much sense to include him in that trade. That, of course, is not going to happen because the Houston Texans have more ammunition to move up there anyway. But maybe Kenny could be the swing piece, the deciding factor.
But if Houston trades the 1, then you're going to trade the 2 with Chicago. So Chicago's still
there
in
you
the
go.
mix.
Still in the mix to trade with Chicago. Good point, Chap. And then Chicago ends up with like 10 first-round picks. And
Kenny Moore.
And Kenny Moore to lead them all.
The player to be named later will name today.
Exactly.
I have a feeling there's going to be several Colts defenders end up in Chicago.
That would not be surprising to me.
That's
the case. That's the case.
Maybe Buckner's in that trade package.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
I wouldn't do that.
That'd be a tough one to let go of him. But I hear you. That'd be a tough one to let go. But anyway, all these things to discuss over the coming weeks. We'll continue our kind of train through the Colts roster with different positions. We've talked a couple of important ones already. We'll get into some more over the coming weeks. But we do appreciate you listening. For Mike Chappell and Joe Hopkins, this has been the Colts Blue Zone podcast. I'm Dave Griffiths, and we'll see you next week.